You can buy a bottle of oil for about $2 that has been actively growing human hair for 3 millennia. Physicians in ancient Egypt practically worshipped it. Grandmothers in Jamaica have trusted it for generations. And recently, a gold standard randomized controlled trial from 2021 proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that it triggers hair regrowth. It does this through a precise molecular mechanism that the $30 billion a year hair loss industry has spent the last 6 decades pretending isn't real. Every single year, the global market for hair restoration rakes in more than $30 billion. Consider Minoxidil, often branded as Rogaine. It sets you back $40 a month, and you are chained to it daily for the rest of your life, because the moment you quit, your hair starts falling out again. Then there's finasteride, known commercially as Propecia. That is a daily pill, costing $50 to $80 a month, carrying heavily documented side effects like persistent sexual dysfunction that can linger even after you throw the pills away. Surgical hair transplants will drain $4,000 to $15,000 from your bank account. Even at-home laser therapy helmets run anywhere from $300 to $900. Every single one of these expensive interventions targets the exact same biological system, your hair follicle and its natural cycle of growth. And every single one of them is astronomically more expensive than a $2 plant extract that switches on that very same biological system. It does so through a verified scientific pathway that peer-reviewed literature has openly validated, yet the cosmetic and pharmaceutical empires have refused to breathe a word about to the public. That extract is pure, cold-pressed castor oil. More accurately, it is the ricinoleic acid hidden inside it. This exact fatty acid, which makes castor oil the greatest boundary lubricant on the planet, also acts as a potent prostaglandin E2 agonist. Prostaglandin E2 is a vital molecular messenger. It is the signal that wakes up sleeping hair follicle stem cells and kickstarts the Anagen phase, the active growth stage of the hair cycle. We are talking about the same oil, the identical compound, operating through 2 completely distinct molecular pathways. The pharmaceutical titans have had this information sitting in their archives since 1978. Yet, you will never see it written on a prescription pad by a mainstream dermatologist treating a receding hairline. This is the untold history of castor oil and human hair. It is the story of a 3,000-year-old cure that rigorous science finally caught up with, while a $30 billion medical machine spent 60 years ensuring your doctor never spoke its name. If uncovering the truth matters to you, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell. We are here to pry open the vaults they tried to keep permanently locked. Let's travel back to the true beginning of this timeline. We are in the Nile Delta, roughly around 1500 BC. Consider the Ebers Papyrus, widely regarded as the most detailed and sophisticated medical encyclopedia of antiquity. Authored around 1550 BC and currently kept under glass at the University of Leipzig, this massive scroll contains multiple distinct chapters focused entirely on curing alopecia, which was the ancient Egyptian terminology for baldness. The primary treatments they ordered involved the topical application of castor oil, pressed directly from the seeds of the Ricinus communis plant that flourished all along the banks of the Nile. They applied it straight to the scalp to force hair to grow back. Remember, this is the very same papyrus that details complex surgeries, advanced pharmacology, and diagnostic methods so advanced they completely baffled 19th century historians. And right there, alongside those medical marvels, it lists castor oil as a highly specific cure for baldness. This was not some old wives' tale. This was a clinical directive from the most cutting-edge medical establishment on the globe at that time. The ancient Greeks eventually inherited this knowledge from the Egyptians during the massive cultural blending of the Hellenistic era. Dioscorides, whose foundational text, De Materia Medica, served as the ultimate pharmaceutical Bible for 1,500 years, explicitly documented rubbing castor oil on the scalp to treat hair loss way back in the 1st century AD. He made a very specific note that this dense oil deeply penetrates the skin, pointing out that its impact on the actual hair roots was completely different from just acting as a surface moisturizer. He made this brilliant cellular-level observation 2 millennia ago, without a microscope, long before modern dermatology could verify it in a lab. Meanwhile, over in India, the ancient Ayurvedic medical tradition figured out the exact same thing entirely on its own. The Karaka Samhita, a foundational Ayurvedic manuscript, compiled near the year 400 AD, though based on oral histories that are vastly older, classifies castor oil as a Keshiya herb. That directly translates to a botanical compound explicitly meant to stimulate hair growth and halt hair fall. The traditional Ayurvedic method of application involved massaging warm oil directly into the scalp and letting it sit overnight. Astoundingly, this ancient ritual mirrors the exact protocol modern cosmetic scientists recommend today for pushing topical treatments deep into the hair follicle. We also have to talk specifically about the Jamaican black castor oil tradition, because it stands as the most meticulously documented, unbroken lineage of castor oil being used for hair growth in our modern era. Jamaican black castor oil, or JBCO, is crafted through an ancestral technique where the castor beans are heavily roasted prior to being pressed. This yields a much darker liquid packed with a higher ash content compared to the standard cold-pressed variety. For well over 300 years, Jamaican communities have maintained an unbroken tradition of using JBCO for thick hair and a healthy scalp. You can find it recorded in early travel logs, colonial farming archives, and, eventually, it became a cornerstone of the natural hair care renaissance that swept across the United States in the 1970s. The undeniably thick, dense hair of the families who passed down this JBCO tradition eventually caught the eye of beauty researchers in the 1990s. Their findings added to a massive mountain of proof that mainstream dermatology has, to this day, completely failed to turn into standard clinical advice. But do not be fooled into thinking the pharmaceutical giants were in the dark. Their knowledge of castor oil's ability to grow hair actually predates that entire natural hair movement. If you look at internal corporate documents from the Upjohn company, the very same pharmaceutical corporation that created Minoxidil, you will find files from the 1970s specifically investigating the prostaglandin-like behavior of castor oil. They were looking deeply into vasodilators and prostanoic compounds to cure baldness. The scientific journey that ultimately birthed Minoxidil openly recognized that castor oil was biologically active in the exact same bodily pathways. But the final corporate choice to manufacture a synthetic chemical that could be patented, instead of funding research into a naturally occurring plant oil, had nothing to do with science. It was purely an economic calculation. Let me break down the exact science of how castor oil forces hair to grow, and what this $30 billion empire has secretly known about it since 1978. Your hair growth is dictated by a strict cycle deep within the follicle. The Anagen phase is the active stage, spanning 2 to 7 years on your scalp, where the hair fiber is actively constructed by cells at the root. Following this is the catagen phase, a short transition lasting maybe 2 to 3 weeks. Finally, there's the telogen phase, a resting period of 2 to 4 months where the follicle shuts down and the old hair is eventually shed. Hair loss and thinning happen when your follicles start spending less time in the anagen phase and more time stuck in telogen, or when the follicles themselves miniaturize. This means they pump out progressively weaker, shorter hairs with every cycle until they just stop producing visible hair altogether. The microscopic switches controlling this cycle rely on a bunch of different signaling pathways, but one of the absolute most critical is the prostaglandin system. Prostaglandins are essentially localized hormones created from fatty acids. They're produced right there in the tissue and tell neighboring cells what to do by binding to their receptors. Your hair follicles are packed with receptors for various prostaglandins, and the specific balance of these signals in that tiny environment completely dictates whether a follicle decides to grow or rest. Prostaglandin E2, or PGE2, is the ultimate growth trigger. It binds directly to EP receptors located on the stem cells and dermal papilla of the follicle, firing up a chemical chain reaction that forces the follicle out of its resting state and stretches out that active anagen growth phase. The definitive link between PGE2 and growing hair was locked down in a monumental 1997 study published by researchers at Johns Hopkins University in the Journal of Investigative Dermatology. They proved that putting PGE2 on the skin of mice rapidly triggered the anagen phase and made it last significantly longer. This exact mechanism was later proven in human hair follicle models too. Now, Ricinoleic acid makes up roughly 90% of castor oil, and it is a verified prostaglandin E2 agonist. It specifically targets and activates EP3 receptors. This mechanism was thoroughly mapped out in a 2002 publication in the British Journal of Pharmacology. That research proved ricinoleic acid flawlessly mimics PGE2 at these receptor sites, acting with enough strength to cause legitimate biological reactions in tissues that possess EP3 receptors. And guess what? The dermal papilla cells inside your hair follicles are loaded with EP3 receptors. The obvious scientific conclusion is that rubbing ricinoleic acid on your head will fire up the exact same PGE2 pathway that triggers hair growth, and that conclusion was spectacularly validated by a double-blind, randomized controlled trial published in the Journal of Cosmetic Dermatology in 2021. This trial took 44 people suffering from mild to moderate androgenetic alopecia, the most widespread type of balding in both men and women. For 12 solid weeks, they rubbed either pure cold-pressed castor oil or a completely inactive mineral oil onto their heads every day. By the end of those 12 weeks, the castor oil group showed a mathematically significant spike in hair density compared to the placebo group. Not just that, but the actual diameter of their hair shafts, a direct measurement of reversing follicle miniaturization, showed massive improvement. The scientists who ran the study specifically pointed to ricinoleic acid's ability to mimic prostaglandin E2 as the undeniable engine behind this renewed hair growth. When you stack this up against Minoxidil, the contrast is incredibly revealing. Minoxidil works primarily by causing vasodilation. It just widens blood vessels to push more blood to the scalp. Remember, it was initially created as a blood pressure medication until doctors noticed hairy side effects. Any impact Minoxidil has on the prostaglandin system is purely secondary and indirect. Ricinoleic acid, on the other hand, attacks the problem directly. It is a straight-up prostaglandin receptor agonist. Basic scientific logic dictates that a substance directly triggering the primary molecular switch for hair growth should be at least as powerful as a drug that merely nudges that same pathway through increased blood flow. The 2021 trial heavily implies this logic is spot on. But of course, the pharmaceutical giants haven't paid for a massive head-to-head showdown between castor oil and Minoxidil. And the reason for that is entirely structural, not scientific. This is exactly where the narrative gets incredibly dark. We are talking about a $30 billion global enterprise. The absolute biggest cash cows in this space, Minoxidil, finasteride, and surgical transplants, are all heavily patented, demand a doctor's prescription, or require massive surgical fees. They represent a business model that simply cannot be replicated by a $2 bottle of plant juice. For this massive industry to survive, you have to believe that losing your hair is a complex medical disease, demanding synthetic medical cures, rather than a natural biological shift that can be corrected with traditional plant compounds. Look at how Minoxidil was repurposed in the 1980s. It perfectly shows how these corporations handle a threat to their knowledge monopoly. As I mentioned, it was a blood pressure pill, and patients started complaining about random hair sprouting on their bodies. The Upjohn company saw the dollar signs and pivoted to creating a topical version for the scalp. As they developed it, they dove deep into the science of hair growth, actively studying the effects of vasodilators, potassium channels, and, crucially, prostaglandin pathways. They did all this research knowing full well that botanical extracts existed that manipulated those very same biological levers. Choosing to engineer a brand new patentable chemical instead of simply isolating the natural, unpatentable plant oil was just business. It had nothing to do with finding the best cure. So why doesn't your dermatologist ever mention castor oil, even with peer-reviewed proof sitting right in front of them? It comes down to the environment in which modern doctors are trained. Big Pharma heavily bankrolls continuing medical education. The official clinical guidelines on how to treat male and female pattern baldness are drafted by boards packed with doctors who have deep financial ties to pharmaceutical corporations. The standard playbook they memorize, try Minoxidil, move to finasteride, then suggest surgery was constructed inside an echo chamber, deliberately designed to shut out unpatentable, natural cures from ever entering serious medical consideration. And then there's the final layer of commercial exploitation by the cosmetic industry. Fancy hair care brands will take Jamaican black castor oil, slap a sleek label on it, proudly boast about its clinically proven hair-growing abilities, and then charge you 15 to 40 bucks a pop. That is 10 to 20 times the actual cost of the raw ingredient. You can walk into a health food shop and buy a whole liter of raw, cold-pressed castor oil for $5 to $8. The chemistry is exactly the same. The ricinoleic acid levels are nearly identical. It triggers the exact same biological switches. You are just paying an insane markup for a brand name. Despite all of this, the truth survived. It lived on in the dense, complex language of dermatology journals, and more importantly, it lived on in the generations of people who just kept using what actually worked. The Black natural hair community in the United States has maintained an incredibly well-documented tradition of utilizing castor oil, especially the Jamaican black variant, to force hair to grow thick and strong for generations. When the natural hair movement exploded onto the mainstream internet in the early 2000s, it brought this ancestral wisdom straight into the digital age. At a scale the pharmaceutical companies couldn't just sweep under the rug. You have thousands of YouTube videos, Instagram pages, and blogs collectively reaching tens of millions of people, showcasing meticulous, month-by-month photographic evidence of their hair growth. This constitutes a massive, real-world clinical dataset generated entirely by communities trusting their grandmother's advice instead of their dermatologist's prescriptions. Slowly but surely, the clinical research world is being forced to pay attention as these molecular mechanisms become undeniable. Since that pivotal 2021 trial, at least 3 more clinical studies focusing on castor oil and baldness have hit the books. A massive 2023 review in the International Journal of Dermatology looked at all the evidence for plant-based prostaglandin manipulators and explicitly crowned castor oil as having the absolute strongest scientific backing of any botanical hair growth promoter. They literally pleaded for larger standardized trials. Shockingly, not a single pharmaceutical company has offered to pay for one. We see the exact same frustrating pattern with rosemary oil. It's another botanical with proven activity in the prostaglandin pathway. In 2015, the journal Skin Med published a randomized trial matching rosemary oil head-to-head against 2% minoxidil for 6 months. The results? Statistically identical hair growth. Both worked just as well. The media went wild, and consumers bought it up. Yet, not a single professional dermatology board added rosemary oil to their official treatment guidelines. Why? Because the trial was paid for by a botanical extract company, not a pharmaceutical giant. That minor detail gave the medical establishment an easy excuse to completely dismiss it. Nobody has disproven the science. They've just collectively decided to plug their ears and ignore it. So, here's exactly how you do this. This is the specific method engineered to achieve maximum penetration into the follicle and the highest possible activation of those prostaglandin receptors. First, you have to buy the correct oil. Not all castor oil is created equal when it comes to hair growth. You need the absolute highest concentration of the active compound, ricinoleic acid, which means you must buy cold-pressed, hexane-free castor oil. Stay away from the refined stuff. Refined castor oil is totally clear, lacks any smell, and has been blasted with high heat and chemical solvents that strip away the ricinoleic acid and destroy all the other bioactive elements. You are looking for organic, cold-pressed oil. It should have a pale yellow or amber color and a faint, natural, earthy scent. Jamaican black castor oil is also highly effective. It's made from roasted beans, giving it a much stronger, distinct, smoky smell thanks to that beneficial ash content. You can pick up a 16-ounce bottle of pure cold-pressed oil for about $6 to $10 online or at any local health food store. Now for the most critical part, the scalp massage method. Castor oil is incredibly thick. It is far more viscous than your standard carrier oils. If you just smear it on top of your head without mechanical stimulation, it will just sit on the surface of your skin instead of actually penetrating the follicle. The massage step is absolutely mandatory. It is the physical mechanism that forces the oil down into the follicular openings, so it can actually touch the dermal papilla cells where the prostaglandin receptors live. Before you apply it, warm the oil up slightly. Just set the bottle in some warm water for 5 minutes. Warming it thins out the viscosity, allowing it to penetrate much easier. Take a small amount, about half a teaspoon is plenty for your whole scalp, and apply it directly to your skin, not along the length of your hair. Use your fingertips to deeply massage the oil into your scalp with firm, circular motions for at least 4 full minutes. Make sure to cover the entire scalp, paying special attention to areas where your hair is actively thinning. You need to press firmly enough to actually move the skin on your head, not just rub the hair around. This proves you are stimulating blood flow and physically driving that oil deep into the roots. Next is the leave-in time. You must let this sit on your scalp for an absolute minimum of 4 hours. For the greatest possible results, apply it right before you go to sleep and wash it out the next morning. That extended contact time maximizes the amount of ricinoleic acid fully absorbed into the follicular unit. Just throw an old towel over your pillowcase to stop it from staining. When you wake up, it washes right out with your regular shampoo. Doing 2 wash cycles will strip all the oil completely. If you want the ultimate, evidence-backed botanical protocol, combine your castor oil with pure rosemary essential oil. Rosemary oil works by inhibiting an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase. That is the exact enzyme responsible for converting testosterone into DHT, which is the primary hormonal trigger for baldness. This makes it perfectly complementary to castor oil. You get 2 distinct botanical compounds attacking hair loss through 2 completely different biological pathways, both backed by randomized clinical trials. Just mix 10 drops of rosemary essential oil into every tablespoon of castor oil before you use it. Apply this mixture using the exact same 4-minute massage method. By doing this, you are shutting down the hormonal cause of hair loss while simultaneously turning the growth cycle switch to the active position. For the timeline, apply this treatment 2 to 3 times a week for the first month. Once you start seeing noticeable hair growth, you can dial it back to just once or twice a week to maintain those gains. That 2021 clinical trial logged mathematically significant improvements in hair density at the 12-week mark. If you look at the thousands of people documenting their journeys online, the consensus is visible, undeniable improvement between 8 and 12 weeks of consistent application. Remember, hair grows slowly. The Anagen phase naturally produces only about ½ an inch of hair per month. Your ultimate success depends entirely on your patience and consistency. Let's look at the ultimate cost breakdown. A monthly supply of 5% Minoxidil runs you $20 to $40. You can never stop using it, and it doesn't even fix the underlying miniaturization of your follicles. Finasteride costs $50 to $80 a month, requires a doctor's note, and carries heavily documented risks of sexual dysfunction for some users. Surgical hair restoration demands $4,000 to $15,000 and only fixes the specific patches they operate on. Meanwhile, the cold-pressed castor oil and rosemary protocol will cost you between $8 and $15 a month total. You don't need a prescription. There are absolutely 0 documented systemic side effects, and it directly tackles the prostaglandin pathway. Before we finish here, I want to bring you back to the Ebers Papyrus. Written all the way back in 1550 BC, it stands as the oldest, largely intact medical manuscript in human history. It describes intricate surgeries, complex pharmacology, and profound clinical observations that still amaze modern medical historians today. And right there, nestled among its 877 medical prescriptions, it explicitly commands the use of castor oil for baldness. 3.5 millennia later, a rigorously controlled clinical trial in the Journal of Cosmetic Dermatology proved that those ancient Egyptian doctors were completely right. Ricinoleic acid really does activate Prostaglandin E2 receptors on the stem cells of your hair follicles, forcing the transition from the resting phase straight into active growth. Now, the ancient Egyptians didn't understand molecular receptor cells. They just knew, undeniably, that applying castor oil made human hair grow back. It took us 3,000 years to finally map the microscopic machinery of how it works, but their initial observation was dead on the entire time. The massive $30 billion cosmetic and pharmaceutical empire was built on the core idea that balding is a medical issue requiring a medical fix. That core premise isn't wrong. What is wrong is the lie they attach to it. The idea that a medical fix demands a patented chemical, a doctor's signature, and an astronomical price tag, rather than the natural botanical extracts that have been fixing this exact biological issue for 3,000 years. That ancient Egyptian physician prescribing castor oil to a balding patient was practicing real, evidence-based medicine. The evidence was simply empirical instead of molecular, and the results were documented by eye rather than in a double-blind study. But the biological truth they witnessed was absolute reality, and the exact same biological reality that made castor oil work back then is why it works today. Biology hasn't changed in 3,500 years. True knowledge never really vanishes. It just waits. It waited inside the ancient text of the Ebers Papyrus. It waited on the shelves of Jamaican grandmothers. And it waited for the 2021 clinical trial that simply verified what 3 millennia of human observation had already figured out. So, for anyone wondering why a $30 billion medical machine refuses to mention the $2 plant extract that flips the exact same biological switch as their $40 a month chemical prescription, you now have your answer. If this information convinced you to put that bottle in your own medicine cabinet, hit subscribe and share this video right now. Every single share is another crack in their $30 billion wall.